The lights of the alien vessel were dim, casting long shadows across the cold, metallic floors. The hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the air, like the pulse of some distant, incomprehensible force. For most, it would be a terrifying sound, a reminder of their isolation in the vast, uncaring expanse of space. But for him, it was strangely comforting, a constant in the whirlwind of chaos that had become his life. Leon crouched by a small window, his breath fogging up the cold glass as he peered out into the black void. Stars blinked back at him, distant and indifferent. This wasn't supposed to be his life. The thought had echoed in his mind since the moment he'd been taken from Earth, dragged from everything familiar, everything safe. But as he stared into the infinite dark, something shifted inside him. The fear had faded, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. There was something more here, something he hadn't yet understood but knew was waiting for him. Behind him, the sound of footsteps echoed in the silence, deliberate, measured. Leon straightened, his senses sharpening. She was coming. Her footsteps were heavy, powerful. They belonged to someone who commanded attention without uttering a single word. He turned slowly, the familiar wave of anticipation rising in his chest. His heart raced, but not from fear. Not anymore. She stood in the doorway, framed by the dim light of the ship's corridors, towering over him. The alien woman was a breathtaking sight, a towering 8-foot frame, slender yet undeniably powerful, her skin a deep shade of green that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. Her eyes, pale and luminescent, locked with his, and for a brief moment, the universe outside seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them. Her name was Thera. The name he had only recently learned, though it felt as if it had been etched into his soul long before. He had never imagined he would be in this position, standing face to face with an alien being, someone whose race was far older and more advanced than humanity could even comprehend. Yet here he was, a human male, in the middle of an alien warship, and she had become his unspoken tether to a new reality. A reality where the rules were different, and so were the consequences. "You're lost in thought," Thera said, her voice low and smooth, laced with an edge he couldn't place. Her alien accent was thick, but her words were clear. "Worried?" Leon swallowed, forcing his gaze to remain steady. "No," he said, though the word felt inadequate. He was far more than just worried. His heart pounded in his chest, racing with emotions he was still trying to understand. "Just thinking." Thera moved closer, the ship's low hum vibrating through her as she passed him, her presence overwhelming. "Thinking about what, human?" She stopped just behind him, her breath warm against his neck, sending a shiver down his spine. Leon hesitated. This wasn't a simple alien encounter. His initial fear had faded weeks ago, replaced with curiosity, frustration, and something else, something far more complicated. He had come here unwillingly, dragged into this conflict between humans and the alien species known as the Trith, but now, his mind and body responded to her, as if he were bound by some invisible force. "About how I got here," Leon said quietly. "And what it means." Thera was silent for a moment, then she stepped around him, her eyes fixed on his. "You don't need to understand it yet. Not now. But you will." Leon's pulse quickened, the weight of her words settling on his chest like an anchor. He had heard her speak of their bond, the connection that had formed between them from the very first moment they had met, something he couldn't explain but couldn't deny. It was a bond that wasn't just physical, but something deeper, primal, inescapable. His lips parted, but before he could speak, Thera reached out, her large hand gently cupping his chin. "The council will be here soon," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, her words carrying a weight he couldn't ignore. "We don't have much time, Leon." The mention of the council made his stomach twist. The Trith were a race of warriors, and their customs were harsh. Their views on relationships, especially those between their own kind and humans, were complicated, to say the least. What had started as an unwilling capture on his part had turned into something entirely different. And the council, the ruling body of the Trith, had made it clear that their union, this bond, was not something they had chosen. Are you afraid? He asked, his voice rough. He wasn't sure why the question escaped him. Perhaps he was asking for reassurance, or perhaps, in that moment, he was wondering if they were both trapped in something far bigger than either of them could control. Thura's eyes softened, just for a moment, before she returned to her usual guarded expression. Fear is irrelevant, she said, a hint of steel in her voice. We do what we must. Leon wanted to ask more, to dig deeper into the mystery of her words, but before he could, a voice crackled through the ship's intercom system. It was deep, authoritative, alien. Thura, we are approaching the designated docking area. The Council awaits your presence. She sighed, a small, almost imperceptible sound, and nodded. I know. There was a heavy silence between them as the reality of the moment set in. Leon could feel it. This was the beginning of something that could change everything. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about understanding this strange new world he had been thrust into. And in the heart of it was Thura, an alien woman whose fate, somehow, was tied to his own. Leon, she said, her voice softer now, almost tender. You'll do what is necessary. We both will. As she turned to leave, the weight of her words lingered in the air, hanging between them like a promise, an ultimatum, and a challenge all at once. Leon stood still, his heart hammering in his chest. The silence of the ship wrapped around him, but it wasn't the emptiness of space that terrified him anymore. It was the undeniable pull he felt toward her. The feelings he had tried to ignore, to suppress, were impossible to deny now. They were bound together by something far more than just fate. He didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time since he had been taken from Earth, he was no longer afraid. It had only just begun. The cold, metallic walls of the Trith vessel pressed in on Leon, their dark surfaces absorbing the sounds of his hurried footsteps as he followed Thura down the winding hallways. Her presence was like a force of nature, unavoidable, magnetic, and completely overwhelming. The deeper they ventured into the heart of the ship, the more alien the environment seemed. This place was a labyrinth of technology and organic matter, its design both foreign and eerily beautiful. The air tasted of ozone, heavy and tinged with the scent of something sweet, almost floral. It was intoxicating, but Leon couldn't focus on that right now. His mind was on the meeting with the Council. He had no idea what to expect, but fear gnawed at him. The thought of confronting the powerful Trith Council, the ruling body of an entire alien race, was enough to make even the most hardened soldiers quiver. And yet Thura walked ahead of him, unshaken. Her head was held high, her pace steady, every movement measured and graceful. There was a quiet strength in her, something that had drawn him to her since the first moment they had met. You're quiet, Thura said without turning around. Her voice was sharp, but not unkind. Too quiet. Leon cleared his throat, forcing himself to focus on her. He had to maintain control, if not for his own sake then for hers. Just thinking, he muttered. It was a lame answer, but it was the truth. He had no idea what he was walking into, and it unsettled him. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about her too. Thura slowed her pace slightly, glancing over her shoulder at him. Her eyes, luminous and piercing, caught his with a knowing look. You're afraid, she said. It wasn't a question, more of a statement, as if she had read his thoughts. I don't know what's coming, Leon admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Thura's expression softened for just a moment, her gaze softening in a way that made Leon's heart flutter uncomfortably. You do not have to be afraid. You are not alone in this. There was something about the way she said that, her words simple yet profound, that made his chest tighten. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust her. But everything about this situation felt so foreign. His body was caught between fear, curiosity, and something deeper, something that felt like an undeniable pull toward her. They arrived at the large chamber at the center of the ship, a circular room where the Trith Council convened. The door slid open before them with a low hum, revealing an intimidatingly large space filled with towering figures. The council was composed of several beings, each more imposing than the next. They were statuesque, their skin glimmering under the cold light, their faces stoic and unreadable. Thura's posture shifted ever so slightly as they entered the room, and Leon felt the tension in the air. His breath caught in his throat, and he instinctively took a step closer to her. She didn't flinch, but he could see the subtle tightness in her shoulders. She was not immune to the weight of this moment, even though she appeared so composed. The council did not speak at first, their eyes scanning Leon and then shifting back to Thura. Their silence was deafening, the only sound the low hum of the ship's core vibrating through the room. Leon fought the instinct to fidget under their gaze, forcing himself to stand still, to breathe deeply. Finally, a voice boomed from one of the council members, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to echo inside his chest. "You bring a human male into our presence, Thura. Why?" Thura remained unwavering, her gaze never leaving the council. "He is here because it is necessary," she replied, her voice steady and firm. Leon couldn't help but glance at her, the intensity in her expression making his stomach churn. He had no idea what was going on, what kind of necessity she was referring to, but the way she said it, like it was already a settled matter, gave him no room to question her authority. Still, he couldn't shake the sense of dread that coiled in his gut. Another council member, a female with skin like polished obsidian, leaned forward, her voice soft but laced with underlying venom. "The bond between you and him, it is unnatural. Our laws do not permit such unions. You know this, Thura." Leon's chest tightened at the mention of their bond. He had felt it, that inexplicable connection between him and Thura. It wasn't just physical, though the attraction was undeniable. It was something deeper, a pull in his very soul, like they had been tethered together by forces beyond comprehension. But hearing it spoken out loud, in front of the council, made him feel exposed, vulnerable. "Your laws," Thura said, her voice laced with an edge that cut through the air, "were never meant to bind us. We are not bound by your rules, nor by your judgment. We are bound by something far greater than any law." The council murmured in unison, their voices low but filled with an unspoken power. Leon could feel the weight of their disapproval like a physical pressure pressing down on him. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, to defend her, but his throat felt tight, and all he could do was stand there. "Thura." The male voice spoke again, softer this time, more calculating. "You know the consequences of defying the council. If this human is a part of your destiny, there will be repercussions. For both of you." For a moment, the air in the room seemed to freeze, and Leon's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the tension rise, the realization that whatever this bond was, whatever it meant for him and Thura, it was going to come with a heavy cost. The council was not one to be trifled with. They were ancient, powerful, and unforgiving. Thura turned to him, her eyes softer now, though still filled with the same quiet intensity. "Leon," she said, her voice just above a whisper, "the path we walk is not an easy one. But it is ours. And I will not let them tear us apart." He met her gaze, the weight of her words sinking in. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain, he was already too far in to turn back. He didn't know what this bond truly meant, but he was beginning to understand one thing. He couldn't walk away from it, from her. As the council's eyes bore down on them both, the gravity of the moment settled over Leon like a shroud. He took a slow, steadying breath. Whatever came next, he would face it, not alone, but with her. And together, they would challenge everything. The ship's corridors were alive with tension. The hum of the engines that once comforted Leon now felt oppressive, the low vibrations in the walls resonating like a warning. The council's words echoed in his mind. "If this human is a part of your destiny, there will be repercussions." He had barely managed to keep his composure in front of them, but the moment they left the chamber, the weight of their judgment was almost too much to bear. The unspoken threat hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. Leon's footsteps were heavy as he followed Thura through the darkened hallways. The ship seemed to stretch on forever, the walls now closing in on him in a way they hadn't before. He had hoped the council's condemnation would push him away from the alien woman, would give him an excuse to turn back, but instead, it only solidified something inside him. He couldn't deny the pull toward her any longer. Thura's pace didn't falter, her steps echoing in the quiet of the ship. She was silent, but Leon could feel the anger radiating off her in waves, a palpable force that shook the air. She was holding it in, controlling herself, but only just. For the first time since they had met, Leon wasn't the one struggling to maintain control. "I don't know what they want from me," Leon said, breaking the silence. His voice was hoarse, thick with frustration. "They say it's about this bond. But they don't understand it any more than I do." Thura stopped abruptly, her back still to him. The air between them grew heavy as she turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Her pale, glowing eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Leon forgot to breathe. "They understand more than you think," she said quietly, her voice layered with something darker. "But their understanding is not what matters." Her eyes softened just slightly, and she took a step closer. "It's us. This bond is between you and me. Not them." Leon stared at her, his heart thudding in his chest. He wanted to say something, anything, to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions inside him, but the words wouldn't come. Thura had always been an enigma to him, but now, more than ever, he couldn't deny the magnetic pull he felt toward her. It wasn't just about their connection, it was something deeper, primal, that bound them together in ways he couldn't yet understand. But it wasn't just the bond that had him entranced. It was the quiet strength in her, the way she carried herself, the way she fought against the weight of her people's expectations and still chose to stand by him. She was more than just an alien warrior to him. She was a partner, a force of nature, and somewhere deep down, he knew he couldn't leave her. Thura's voice broke through his thoughts, her words soft yet laced with steel. "I will not let them dictate our future. Not now, not ever." The fire in her words made Leon's heart race. The world outside seemed to fade as he took a step forward, drawn by the same force that had brought them together. "Then what do we do? How do we fight them?" Her lips curled into the faintest of smiles, a flash of something wild and unyielding in her eyes. "We do what we must," she said, her voice firm. "We make our own path. And we don't look back." Leon's breath caught in his throat. He had never been one for grand gestures or taking risks, but standing here with her, the weight of her words settled over him like a mantle. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in his life, he knew what it meant to truly fight for something. They stood there for a moment, the world around them falling away. The ship, the council, even the tension in the air, it all disappeared. It was just him and Thura, together in this strange, vast universe, and the bond between them that seemed to grow stronger with every passing second. But as quickly as the moment had come, it was shattered by the sudden, harsh sound of a door opening. A low, menacing voice filled the space between them. "Thura," the voice growled, thick with disdain. "The council has made their decision. You have 1 hour to comply, or there will be consequences." Leon turned toward the voice, his pulse quickening. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, imposing truth warrior whose mere presence exuded power. His armor was decorated with sharp, angular designs that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly energy. He was a council enforcer, one of the few who could enforce their will through sheer force. Thura didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her posture unyielding. "I will not comply with your demands," she said, her voice steady but filled with a cold fury. "Not this time." The enforcer's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "You will learn, Thura. You are not above the law. And neither is your human companion." Leon felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The threat was clear, and it was aimed at both of them. But there was something in Thura's eyes now, something that stirred deep within him. She wasn't afraid, not in the slightest. And seeing her like that, seeing her stand so confidently in the face of danger, filled him with a sense of power he hadn't known he was capable of. Thura took a step forward, her eyes locking onto the enforcers. "If you want to fight me, then come. But know this, I will not be controlled. Not by you, and not by anyone." The enforcer's lips curled into a cruel smile, revealing sharp, alien teeth. You misunderstand, Thera. This isn't about control. It's about survival. For both of you. With a swift motion, he stepped back, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he had come. But his words lingered in the air, heavy and threatening. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Leon felt the weight of the enforcer's words pressing down on him. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about their very survival. Thera turned to him, her expression softer now, but there was a new fire in her eyes. They're coming for us, Leon. But I will not let them tear us apart. We will fight. Together. Leon's heart pounded in his chest as he looked at her. The bond between them was undeniable now, and the stakes had never been higher. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in his life, he felt ready to face whatever came their way. And whatever the cost, he knew he would stand by her side. The tension in the air was suffocating as Leon stood at the threshold of the command deck. The low hum of the Trith vessel vibrated through the floor beneath his boots, but it felt like a distant thing, drowned out by the pulse of his own racing heartbeat. Behind him, Thera moved with the fluid grace of a predator, her every step purposeful and sure. The unease between them was palpable, but there was something more, something unspoken that had shifted since their confrontation with the council. Leon's gaze flickered over to her, a sense of awe and fear mingling deep within him. She was no longer just an alien warrior to him, she was something more. She was a force that he couldn't escape, no matter how hard he tried. And he didn't want to escape it. Not anymore. Do you think they'll follow through? Leon asked quietly, his voice a low murmur against the oppressive silence. Thera's sharp eyes flicked toward him, her lips barely curving into a faint smile. They'll try. But they don't understand what they're dealing with. She paused, letting her words hang in the air. We don't just defy their laws, Leon. We defy the very foundation of their power. And they'll stop at nothing to make sure we pay for it. Leon swallowed, the weight of her words sinking in like a stone in his chest. This wasn't a game. This wasn't just about a rebellious love affair or a forbidden bond. The stakes had escalated beyond what either of them could have anticipated. The Trith weren't just going to let them walk away. They stopped at the door to the command deck, the sleek metal surface flickering with lights. Thera didn't hesitate. She placed a hand on the door, and it slid open with a low hiss. Inside, the room was vast, the walls lined with intricate displays that pulsed with data. But what caught Leon's attention immediately was the figure standing at the center of the room. The enforcer from earlier. His dark, imposing figure loomed over the space like a shadow, his cold, calculating eyes fixed on them as they entered. A ripple of dread shot through Leon, but he stood his ground. You've come for us, Thera said, her voice steady, though her posture was a mixture of strength and something else, something deeper. You want to destroy what we've built. But I won't let you. The enforcer's lips curled into a twisted smile. You're mistaken, Thera, he said, his voice low and menacing. You're not the one in control here. The council's decision stands. You will comply, or your fate will be sealed. Leon felt a cold sweat slick against his skin as the enforcer's words washed over him. He wanted to speak, to say something, but the weight of the situation left him speechless. He was just a human. A single, insignificant piece in a galaxy full of powerful beings. What could he possibly do? Thera, however, stood unyielding, her eyes locked onto the enforcers. You will not break us, she said, the words a fierce declaration. This bond, what we have, it's not something you can destroy with your laws. The enforcer's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. You don't understand, do you? He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You think your love, your bond, can protect you. But this is bigger than you both. The Trith will not allow it. Leon's heart thudded painfully in his chest as the enforcer's presence seemed to fill the room, making the air thick and suffocating. He wanted to take a step back, to retreat from the oppressive force of the Trith warrior, but something held him in place. He couldn't, he wouldn't, leave Thera. Without warning, the enforcer moved with lightning speed, his hand gripping Leon's throat in a vice-like hold. The pressure was immediate and crushing, and Leon gasped, his vision going blurry. Enough! Thurah's voice rang out, sharp and powerful, cutting through the tension. In an instant, she was at the enforcer's side, her hand wrapping around his wrist, forcing him to release Leon. The enforcer's eyes flickered toward her, and for the first time, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his expression. You truly believe you can challenge me? He sneered. Thurah's gaze was icy. I don't believe, she said coldly. I know. With a single, fluid motion, she shoved the enforcer back, sending him stumbling a few steps. He regained his balance quickly, but there was no denying the shift in power. Thurah was not just a warrior, she was a force in her own right. Leon gasped for air, the pressure in his throat slowly fading as he staggered back, his hands clutching at the fabric of his shirt. His chest ached with the force of his breath, but he didn't dare take his eyes off Thurah and the enforcer. The tension was thick, and for a moment, it seemed like the world had frozen. But the silence was shattered by a voice, calm, calculated, and dangerously cold. Enough. The voice came from behind them. Another figure, cloaked in shadows, stepped forward from the entrance to the command deck. His presence was commanding, his authority undeniable. Leon's stomach churned as he recognized the figure, a high-ranking member of the Truth Council. You may have defied us, Thurah, the council member said, his tone ice-cold. But you will not win this fight. The council's will is law, and it will be carried out. Thurah didn't flinch, her gaze hardening as she turned to face him. Your law means nothing to me. The council member's lips curled into a smile, but it was empty. Then you will be destroyed for it. Both of you. Leon's heart skipped a beat. The words were a death sentence, and it was clear the council was prepared to carry it out. They had underestimated Thurah, but now, with the High Council member's presence, they knew that the time for defiance had passed. Thurah stepped forward, her posture rigid, and Leon followed instinctively, placing himself beside her. He had no illusions anymore. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about something much larger, about the very survival of their bond, and everything they had fought for. The council member's eyes flickered with something akin to curiosity as he regarded Leon. You still don't understand, he said, voice laced with disdain. You are nothing but a pawn in this game. And you will fall. Leon's chest tightened, but he straightened his shoulders, meeting the council member's gaze. He wasn't the pawn in this game anymore. Not after everything. And Thurah had proven that they weren't just a force to be reckoned with. They were a force of their own. And no one, not even the Truth, would tear them apart.